there's any overarching point to take away from today's events, it is that these issues require your action, at least your attention, and ideally your active engagement as a spokesperson. You might hear sometimes in mosques and masjids people talk about civic engagement as an antidote to radicalization, right? And sometimes the narrative goes like this: if we engage civically, other people see us, they come to realize that we're neighbors, not threats. There's another narrative you'll hear sometimes that goes like this: if you civically engage, that'll provide a vent to your political frustrations, and for alienated youth who are being bullied, discriminated against, and profiling, it'll provide an alternative avenue to violence. Instead of being susceptible to the recruitment of violent extremists, they will instead engage in our political system and make us all stronger. There's another way to look at it, which goes like this: if you don't defend your interests, no one will. Right? Frederick Douglass made it quite clear: power does not concede anything without a demand. And when Nihad is talking about the civil rights movement and activists at the time not allowing themselves to be defined by the basis of the color of their skin rather than the content of their character, what did that look like? It looked like organizing. Right? Exactly what you're doing today. It involved showing up, coming out, learning information. It involved connecting with friends and neighbors and colleagues and acquaintances across all faiths and communities who share our interests. And again, that's Muslims, it's Latinos, it's environmentalists, it's peace activists. It is increasingly, and I'll be honest with you, people who don't necessarily share our political interests who are equally impacted by the race to criminalize ideology. Right? Just on Thursday, in fact, I was lobbying on Capitol Hill against reauthorization of the Patriot Act, which is separate from, but quite similar to, the threats we're talking about, right? The expansion of executive power. And among the people that were standing with us there were supporters of the Tea Party and some of the incoming GOP freshmen who were equally aghast at the idea of the government having unchecked power to arbitrarily invade the lives of law-abiding people. So be expansive in your search for allies, and be engaged in reaching out to these people. A few minutes? All right, well, I'll go on for a while then. I was just about to wrap up. Let's talk a little bit about executive aggrandizement. I touched on that, and I started to insinuate this point about how these are not left versus right, or progressive versus conservative, or rural versus urban, or Muslim versus non-Muslim issues. Right? These are American versus Soviet issues, and that goes like this. It is across two political parties in the last decade, first by President Bush and now by President Obama in the White House, two political parties in the White House, that this agenda to enlarge the sphere of the executive has continued. And the roots go on well before that. You could go back to, we were talking about the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, or for that matter, Ruby Ridge and Waco. Those are extensions of executive power under a prior administration. Go back earlier, Reagan and the Iran-Contra scandal. Go back all the way to Eisenhower and the military-industrial complex. There is a profound derogation of democracy that has been happening for at least 2 generations in America. And it transcends political party. Democrats are as complicit as Republicans. It doesn't matter if you elect change in the White House. That's one thing we could learn over the last 2 years, right? I mean, these particular offenses that the prior panel was talking about, law enforcement abuses of domestic communities, have only grown worse in the last 2 years. Mike will be talking a little bit about why and the policy structures that enable that, particularly at the FBI. But you could look at other policies too. It is President Obama who has asserted, for the first time in memorable history, the authority to arbitrarily assassinate U.S. citizens. It's under President Obama that the Supreme Court basically decided that funding efforts to bring nonviolent conflict resolution to war-torn areas can be somehow construed as material support for terrorism and criminalized. These are not Bush-era abuses. They are that too, but these are Obama-era abuses. And look at Congress. Under both parties, Congress has been complicit, actively facilitated the enlargement of the executive against its own institutional interests. The Federalist Papers, number 10, James Madison talks about the need, it's a crucial document in constructing the theory of democracy. And he argues essentially that factions in a democracy are inevitable. So how do you keep a faction from destabilizing the state? If stopping them from happening is anti-democratic, well then the solution is to ensure that there are as many as possible so that they check each other. That's part of the genius in our system of government, right? You have executive, legislative, judicial, you have federal, state, local, and they're all supposed to check each other and balance each other so that precisely what is coming to pass today doesn't happen. There is an alignment between political parties and alignment between government institutions that are meant to check each other, namely Congress and the White House. So whether it's a Democrat in the White House or a Republican in the White House, whether it's a Republican-controlled Congress or a Democratic-controlled Congress, whatever the lineup of interests, you see this race to protect a very narrow conception of national security at the cost of all of our constitutional liberties. And that's what the Constitution was set up to prevent. That's why they're constitutional and not merely law. These aren't even supposed to be questions that the political branches can reach. Yet, I could point to, the Patriot Act, FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the Military Commissions Act, the FOIA Amendments Act of last fall. I mean, it goes over and over again where there is a lockstep between branches of governments advancing essentially an executive aggrandizing agenda. Another way to say that very succinctly is fascism. And I don't think it's as bad yet as it could be, or quite frankly that it will be. And at this point in history, when we see a cusp, when we see in other countries a very inspiring, widespread, broad-based movements for democracy clamoring against much worse repression than we face here, we in the United States are complicit as democracy falls through the floor beneath us. And we have to be quite real about our point in history and our role in history as privileged people within it to live here in the seat of a global empire. At the time that it is in flux, it is incumbent upon us not just to pay attention, not just to engage and speak out, but to organize. We have to reach out across boundaries. We have to be organizing within our communities and across them. And there are a million opportunities to stop these abuses, particularly profiling. I'd be happy to speak with any of you about them in particular after the panel. What we basically do at the Bill of Rights Defense Committee is work with grassroots activists to secure civil rights protections in your towns. And there's a huge opportunity there. I'd be thrilled to work with any of you about it. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you.